Welcome to episode 7 of FCLE Seminar, the Florida Civic Literacy Exam podcast. I'm your host, Mercedes Musto. The FCLE podcast is where we review American history to help you prepare for the Florida Civic Literacy Exam. Today, we are exploring a landmark Supreme Court case called Korematsu v. the United States in 1944. This is all based on the guide put together by the Florida Department of Education. I've got the links to that study stuff in the show notes, so hey, check those out, and don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to our podcast at FCLE Seminar on YouTube. All right, let's get started. Landmark Supreme Court case number 6, Korematsu versus the United States. Case background. This case takes place during World War II. Okay. On December 7th, 1941, Japan drops bombs on an American naval base in Hawaii. This event is called the Attack on Pearl Harbor. As a result, the United States enters war with Japan and officially enters World War II. Now, a lot of stuff is going on, but this led to a series of measures aimed at protecting national security. And at the same time, there was this growing social influence of intensity of racism against Japanese Americans and Americans of Japanese descent. And what I mean by this is that many people in American society, individuals and businesses alike, were intensifying their discrimination and persecution against Japanese Americans. They were saying as an excuse that the Japanese Americans may have loyalties to Japan, who we were at war with. Now, at this time, President Franklin Roosevelt signed what was called the Executive Order 9066 in February 1942. This order mandated the relocation of Japanese Americans to internment camps for national security purposes. Now, we've heard some of this national security stuff before in the last episode. You heard me correctly. The U.S. directly affected the internment of 120,000 Japanese Americans. I mean, this is crazy because internment, it means imprisonment associated with wartime. What? Yeah. So check this out. Fred Korematsu, a young Japanese American living in California, decided to stay home. I mean, he refused to comply with the government's order to relocate to what they called a relocation center, aka concentration camp. Since Korematsu stayed home and refused to comply, he was arrested and convicted of violating Executive Order 9066. However, Korematsu argued that the executive order violated his Fifth Amendment rights. Now, remember, the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, that's the one that protects citizens from self-incrimination, guarantees due process, and protects many other rights. Let's see. The Fifth Amendment states that, quote, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, end quote. It also says that no person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's very important, due process of law. Plus, it does go on to say some other important declarations, so check those out. This is where things get interesting, yeah? You ever heard someone on TV say, like, I plead the Fifth? Okay, so the central question before the Supreme Court in Korematsu versus the United States goes something like this. Has the government overstepped its bounds in ordering the internment, fancy word for imprisonment, of Japanese Americans? And did the president and Congress have the authority to restrict the rights of American citizens based on their ancestry, aka like how they look? The court's decision. This is why this is a landmark Supreme Court case. In a majority decision, 6-3, the Supreme Court upheld the government's internment order, saying that it was a military necessity. The majority opinion, written by Justice Black, argued that the government's actions were necessary for national security, during wartime. However, the decision was not without dissent. Justice Jackson, in a powerful dissenting opinion, argued that the internment order was not based on military necessity, but on racial prejudice, and that violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Interpretation, because that's a lot, right? Based on Justice Jackson's dissent, this is what I'm thinking. It's not okay to strip U.S. citizens like Korematsu of their constitutional rights based on the national security concerns during wartime, right? The constitutional principle here. We're looking at the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment. See, Justice Jackson strongly disagreed with the Supreme Court's decision in Korematsu v. United States. He argued that the government had unjustly convicted Korematsu. Jackson believed that the nation's wartime security concerns were not sufficient grounds to strip Korematsu and other Japanese Americans of their civil rights. Furthermore, Jackson criticized the Executive Order 9066 as a form of legalized racism. He compared it to the discriminatory practices of dictatorships, arguing that it violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Jackson concluded that the executive order was unconstitutional. Hey, I know you're speechless as a result of the last few episodes, but listen, you're really getting things done. You're doing great. Not only are you going to ace that exam, but you're going to walk away with a deep knowledge of the U.S. Constitution and why it's so important. Let's review. Korematsu versus the United States remains highly controversial, just like Plessy versus Ferguson in one of the previous episodes. So here are the takeaways. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. entered World War II, and President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 that mandated Japanese Americans to internment in relocation camps. But not Fred Korematsu. He did not comply. He stayed home and was arrested. When this case went all the way to the Supreme Court, the majority voted to uphold the Executive Order 9066 during wartime. But Korematsu argued this was a violation of his Fifth Amendment, and Justice Jackson argued that this was a violation of the 14th Amendment, guaranteeing equal protection under the law. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot, right? Hey, thanks for listening. Join us again on FCLE Seminar, a Florida Civic Literacy Exam podcast, so you can start studying for your test. The important thing is to start studying and start studying today. Well, what are you waiting for? Like, share, subscribe, and leave your questions or comments for us at FCLE Seminar on YouTube, or hit me up on Spotify, Apple, or any of your other favorite podcast players. This podcast is listener-supported. Contributions can be made via the listener support link on Spotify, or you can buy me a coffee via the link in the show notes. This is your host, Mercedes Musto. Join me again on FCLE Seminar, a Florida Civic Literacy Exam podcast, so you can pass the FCLE.